move to the next speaker, who's Richard Evans. Richard is director of Beamish Museum. He has been since 2008. He's created 100 new jobs have been created in his time at Beamish. There's been a 200,000 rise in attendance during that time. They very kindly signed our autism charter in 2015. I went up to Beamish the other day just to catch up with Richard, and it was absolutely fantastic to meet with him in a 1950s living room, which looked all too familiar to me, I'm sorry to say. But would you please welcome Richard Evans?
Thanks very much for that. I'm not an expert at all, really, in all of this, so, and I'm also apologise, I'm not in costume, normally I am, but I had a very dry meeting with some council staff this morning who tend to be a bit alarmed if I turn up in my bowler hat, so I do apologise for that. I just got a few minutes to tell you about our experience at Beamish, and I suppose I have mixed feelings, really, about standing up as an exemplar or a case study, really, because I don't really think of it like that, and in fact, in many ways, our experience at Beamish is to try not to stress the barriers and the differences, but actually the similarities, really, because the more you focus on the potential barriers and difficulties, the more people seem to invent more barriers and difficulties. And actually, my own experience is I recognise so many traits which are called, which people who are living with autism have, and really by just seeing it as all part of an inclusive organisation is a much more productive thing for us. Really, I think my message to employers who aren't knowingly employing people with autism is if you're running an organisation of any size, you probably are. We've got about 420 odd staff now at Beamish, and we've been growing faster than China, about 10% a year for the last 8 years. And you don't believe Chinese figures, you won't believe mine either. We get about 700,000 visitors a year. So I'm not a statistician, I'm a really boring historian, but I tried to work it out from the figures that John was telling me earlier on, and I failed, really. But you can work out that the likelihood is that we're both welcoming people with autism all the time, and it's quite likely that of our paid and unpaid workforce of about 900 people, there are going to be people who are living with autism amongst them that have not been diagnosed, as well as those that have. So my message is, you're probably already employing them. You certainly should, unless you're a mean person. And it makes sense. It makes sense for the individuals, it makes sense for your colleagues and other members of staff, and it makes sense for your customers as well. And I'll just briefly go through that. Now, I was asked earlier when someone was pointing a television camera at me, do you make adjustments? And I said, well, you obviously make an adjustment for anyone's skill. Now, I've got 10 thumbs, right? I don't repair the trams at Beamish. If I repaired the trams at Beamish, they would fall off the rails. So, yes, that's true. You look at the skills of anybody in the organisation. It isn't just entry-level jobs we're talking about. We're talking about highly creative jobs, curators, researchers that really add value to our business. So, of course, there is an assessment. And the issues that John were raising about tailoring that for individual companies, I think is a really positive way forward. And I really wholeheartedly support that. For us, it's been placements, volunteering in many cases, leading through to employment. Realising that it has to be a process which the individual feels comfortable with and recognises the varying talents of them as individuals in the same way as you do for the rest of your workforce. We have about 450 volunteers. They cause me much more problems than anybody who we've worked with through the Autism Society who has autism. Not wanting to stress that particularly. What impact can it have on the individual? Well, it's a bit like us. If we lose our jobs, we suffer from anxiety, sense of dislocation, loss of self-worth, all of these things. And of course, if you have autism, I guess those feelings are heightened and heightened. But it's no different from the rest of us, I don't think. And obviously, it's healthy for us to feel connected to a social group through our work. And that sense of self-worth, I think, can lead to independent living, being able to get on a bus for the first time, lots of really tangible and real improvements, I think. No different from how we would all feel, those of us that don't live with that. It can be an important part of our identity. Normally is. Normally the first question you get asked is, what do you do? To which I always struggle to answer that question, but I'm sure you have a better answer than I do. And I think it's obviously, it can have, and we know from our experience at Beamish, it can really genuinely have a transformational effect on the individual, but also your employees, in which case, we have about 900 people that support the museum, about half of them paid, half of them not. And I think somebody mentioned earlier on that with sufficient support, the care and of your staff who support in a very informal way is a real source of pride, and it sets for me a sort of working culture and values that every organisation ought to have, that it's a very supportive, inclusive environment that you want to create. And we try not to formalise that too much. And it creates I think it's a very supportive thing for creating the sort of environment that every workplace ought to be like, really. So I think the effect it has, and also many of the people that we have worked with autism over the years are absolutely hilarious. They can create a real sense of fun and enjoyment within the workplace. So don't underestimate that. Working with people with autism is a lot of laughs, really. So I think it's all about supporting that. And in a way, we all create sort of managed realities. I really do create a managed reality. Obviously, if you know Beamish, that is what we do. But even if you're an IT company, your office is a managed reality. So I think that having people with autism within that reality is a thoroughly healthy thing, which I would encourage. And finally, because I think I'm keeping you from a cup of tea and a canapé, the customers that you reach. Now, I grew up with my uncles having Down syndrome. Now, I never thought it was unusual from the age of 0 that there were people in the world with Down syndrome. However, lots of people didn't, and obviously if your customers, and in my case 700,000 people, I don't suppose many of you have 700,000 people walking into your office on a day-to-day basis, but I think it's very healthy for the public to experience it. And it's very interesting when you see the effect on the members of the public, because there's one particular guy who works at a museum who just tends to get a bit too close sometimes, and it's a sort of he's not actually able to judge the distance effectively, and you can see that he's not trying to be rude, and you can also see the effect on the other person. And what often happens is there's this sort of British stiffening. I mean, he's not assaulting them, he's just a little bit just too close. And then there's this realisation, this sort of light bulb moment comes on. And I think it's entirely healthy that all of our businesses help make it feel entirely natural. And of course it's the case that the more experience that people have of people living with autism, the less it's seen as a different thing that we need to cope with, the more it's seen as something which is part of our everyday lives. For me personally, that's the better. So just to finally wrap up, if you aren't working with this wonderful organisation, not this organisation, well, you can work for this organisation if you like, you have to see me after, but just backing up John's point, you really must. And why should you do it? Because I think it creates and adds value to your business and will help you create growth. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Evans. I don't want to keep you from the team canapes either, but there's just 2 quick points I would like to make. When I did visit Beamish, what Richard and I were just saying, if you get it right for people with autism, you're going to get it right for a whole lot of other people as well. And, we can include so many more people and make life so much better just by making small differences and reasonable adjustments. So one of the things, as Dame Stephanie's point about some of the challenges for individuals who in the workplace, that's why we want a partnership with employers to work with you through all of those factors and make sure that we get a good match, the right job for the right person. And finally, just Richard's point about fun, I just should mention one quick story because of the difference in the way that people think, and you can have some fun with it. Rita Jordan, who's a bit of a guru on autism, was telling us about walking with a group of young men through Edgbaston, which is, for those who don't know, it's a leafy suburb of Birmingham. And it was bin day, and the top of the flip-top bins were open, and a squirrel ran down the tree and dropped into the top of the bin to see if there's any food to feed on. And one of the young guys said, "Look at that. Who'd have thought somebody would have thrown out a perfectly working squirrel?"